Hello and welcome back, and today I want to talk about the subject of network switches. This is another before you buy, and today I want to talk to you guys about switches in the most glorious detail. Some of this stuff is going to be super dull, so unless you're particularly vested in either buying a network switch or want a bit of help buying the right one moving forward and making sure you get it right first time, stick around, but otherwise you might not enjoy this. This is going to be super dull. But let's talk about network switches. Why are they important? What should you look out for? What do you need and what do you not need? And I guarantee there's a couple of things in this video that you didn't know existed. But let's get a quick disclaimer straight off the bat. I am well aware what an absolute mess this desk is right now. I'm preparing for a very big video coming up soon, and it's taken up a lot of space and a lot of hardware, as you can see there. Consequently, I can't really move this stuff. I've powered down some of it, but some of it's in the middle of operation, so unfortunately I can't remove it there, but it will make sense soon, and I'd rather not talk about the video in case it all goes wrong. But network switches, what are they? Well, a number of you, your first feeling towards network switches, or even the idea that you know they exist, is the day when your router from your internet service provider, your ISP, suddenly runs out of ports. Now, these are obviously premium devices I've got on the table that you buy, but generally a router from your internet service provider, that box that they give you with your contract, otherwise known as a combined router and modem or wireless modem, there are lots of different names thrown around, that device will have certain ports on the rear of it. Now, one of those ports, whether it's cabled directly in or using kind of a telephone type cable, an ADSL, that cable takes up one port. Now, the remaining ports might go towards your smart TV if it's close enough, your home console, always better to work on LAN, right? It might be going towards another media device, it might be going towards bits and bobs, a computer or something. But ultimately, most routers that get included by internet service providers have between 2 and 4 ports, which get eaten up really quickly. And then suddenly, particularly during the year of the pandemic, when people having to work from home and move office equipment or unfamiliar office equipment into the home, they suddenly realised that the number of ports and connections on their home router was just not cutting it. Hence where switches suddenly leapt up in both popularity and in knowledge. Suddenly people had to find out what they were very quickly and whether they needed them. But before we go any further, what is the difference between a router and a switch? Let's grab a couple of these. This is a switch here. This is a QNAP switch, an unmanaged QWS 3081C. We'll talk in a little bit more detail in a bit. And this is a Synology router. This is their mesh router that we talked about before. This is the MR2200AC, and we're going to ignore the fact it's mesh for now. We're just going to talk about the difference between them now, a router and a switch. So, a router is, and I know a lot of you are really cringing when I say that word. I see it in the comments all the time. Router, it's your own country, you decide. But a router is effectively the gateway to the internet. It shares a lot of the abilities of a switch, not all of them, but some of them, such as the ability to route traffic between different devices and manage and load people exchanging data across the network. And although it can do those things, it is predominantly designed to be your gateway between you and the internet. Now, the reason people need switches is because they need a little bit less of that gateway to the internet lark, and they need a lot more of the network management lark. In the case of a switch, it allows you to add significantly large, the light going nuts there, significantly larger numbers of network interface ports onto your network, with each connected device being able to communicate in a lovely big loop. But also that network switch is connected to the router, and therefore the internet is presented to that switch network, and all those devices can reach the internet through it as well. But whereas the router prioritizes keeping the gate open and shut where appropriate with the internet, the switch is about your local network and all the management there in between. There's also other features such as link aggregation, quality of service control, priority of service control, and lots of stuff like that that we'll talk about in a bit, which aren't really available on routers, apart from more modern and enterprise grade ones, definitely not ISP. But that's your main difference. Gateway to the internet, gateway to the network, and each one prioritizes within each. And there's a lot more to it than that, but that's a great way to look at the difference between a router and a switch. So On top of that, we can move on to the first thing you need to bear in mind when you buy a switch for the first time, and we'll move away from these two devices, and we're going to look at this switch. This is a Netgear 10 GBE switch. We're going to ignore the fact that it's 10 GBE for now, but it's important that we talk about it a little bit in this video. Now, the first thing you're going to need to bear in mind when buying your very first switch is the number of ports. Now, this is already going to connect to your router. So you're going to lose one port already, straight away. Maybe you're running more than one connection to the router, or you're running another connection to another router with another internet service or a mobile router. Therefore, you might lose two of them. Why would you do that? Failover support, that kind of thing. But generally as a rule of thumb, if I have a bunch of devices in my network, be they cameras, laptops, entertainment devices, whatever number of devices I currently have that I need a switch for, I immediately double that number and get a switch with that number, because you need to have room for growth across the network. You need to be able to create failovers for some devices. You need to be able to have a more flexible network. And if you have 7 devices in your network and you buy an 8-port switch, you're fine at the beginning, but the minute you add one device, you're done. So make sure you always double that, and where possible, always try to go. There's 8, 12, 16 and 24 port switches, and they go higher and higher. But bear in mind that when you do get a switch, the minute you go above 8 ports, I strongly recommend that you look into 10 GBE switches, something we'll talk about later on. But the next consideration to bear in mind when buying your first switch is managed versus unmanaged. Now, I touched on a bunch of features earlier there. I talked about link aggregation or port trunking, quality of service, layer 2 security functionality, loop detection. Then you've got just lots of different configurations and control of ports, all built into a switch. However, switches either arrive with hardware architecture inside that allows end users to configure the most bespoke network to their needs and their requirements, that is known as a managed switch, or they arrive with much more rudimentary architecture hardware inside, generally an SoC or software on chip, and that processor does everything by default. You can't configure it, there's no user interface to play with, but you have all of the features and functionality set to a default. So it's basically some predetermined rules and regulations built into the system to manage your network. Now, unmanaged switches, because they don't have that flexibility and they have much more rudimentary, albeit more cost-effective architecture inside, the result is an unmanaged switch is generally noticeably cheaper, some 20 to 30% cheaper in most cases, regardless of the size or ability of a switch. Managed switches, generally more business-led, because of the architecture and because of the customization and control, will cost you more. So do work out if you need those features and functionality and whether you're spending money that you don't really need to spend. Bringing us back to the subject of 10 GBE. A lot of people, when they buy a switch, will go, going to get me a 10G switch, future-proofing, done. You might not need it. I love 10 GBE, and I talk about 10 GBE on this channel all the time. 10 gigabit Ethernet. It's so affordable now, it's a joke. I remember a decade ago when even the most simplistic 10G setup cost thousands of pounds. You can now pick up 10 GBE equipped switches like this one that will set you back a few £100. It's really affordable. So therefore, I can understand the appeal of why you would want to go for a 10 GBE switch. However, do bear in mind there are certain hidden costs to 10 GBE that you may not be aware of. You can't simply just connect a 10 gigabit Ethernet switch to your local PC or media system and then suddenly get 10 times usual Ethernet speeds. You will need to make sure that the connections on the connected devices via 10 GBE are also 10 GBE. Otherwise, they become bottlenecked. Case in point, if you go ahead with a 10 GBE switch like this Netgear here and connect it to your smart TV with a LAN port on the rear, chances are, although you want to enjoy super fast media or you think you're going to get suddenly 1000 megabytes per second throughput, there isn't a single TV in the world right now that is 10 GBE enabled. Consequently, it will be bottlenecked to 1 GBE. In the case of TVs, not much of a problem. It's still more than enough to put through most multimedia these days at 100 megabytes per second. But if you're a photo video editor and you're trying to connect your client PC or Mac system that only has 1 GBE to a 10G switch, you will not be able to take advantage of those speeds, particularly with a 10G switch at the 10G NAS at the end. So always make sure that you're aware that you're going to have to update every single one of your client computer devices with the likes of 10 GBE via PCIe card or a Thunderbolt adapter, or you're going to have to go ahead with PCIe upgrade cards that go straight into desktop systems. These can range from between £100 to £250 depending on the brand. There's lots of links in the description in the article there. But just remember, if you are going to go for 10 GBE, you don't have to go the whole hog. You can go for affordable switches like this that have 1 or 2 combo ports built in that allow you to have a combination of a lot of 1 GBE connections and just 1 or 2 10 GBE devices that you can attach a good solid NAS, and everyone can then share full fluidity with that NAS quite easily. Now, another thing you need to bear in mind when buying a switch is if you're going to be looking at switches that are PoE, or Power over Ethernet. Power over Ethernet switches are switches that not only transfer data to all the connected client devices, but also supply up to an area of power. This power can be utilised from everything from IP cameras to IP speakers, alarm systems, and other generally surveillance-led tools. These allow you to deploy devices that may not be anywhere near a mains power socket, but can have power transmitted from them to them via a simple Ethernet connection between the switch and the device, like so. So it's nice and straightforward and nice and easy to know that PoE switches have a place. However, one, PoE switches are noticeably more expensive due to the larger PSU inside, and therefore a lot more work has to go onto cooling systems inside, as well as ensuring power delivery is maintained safely. The second thing to bear in mind is that a switch, although being labelled at say 185 watts or 300 watts or 500 watts, does not guarantee all of that power to an individual port. Each port on a PoE switch will generally have a maximum limit of somewhere between 15 to 30, maybe 50 watts in some cases. But ultimately it means that you can't hope to connect to a PoE switch a device that's going to draw all 100 or so watts, because each one of those ports will max out at a particular power. So if you do buy a PoE switch, remember that if you are powering devices, to double check that the switch delivers enough power via a single connection to power that singular device. PoE switches have come down in price notably over the last few years, but they're still not the cheapest out there, and they do lead us very neatly into our last two subjects. The first one being warranty. Now, the warranty behind a switch is a very contentious area for a lot of people. First and foremost, most switches these days arrive in two categories. They either arrive from the likes of QNAP and other brands like that release switches for home and business users for every tier, with a warranty of somewhere between 2 to 3 years, which is great. It means, as far as warranty is concerned, that if something goes wrong with this device and it's not your fault, they will repair or replace the model within that time period. Generally, it doesn't include software, with software arriving with arguable lifetime warranties and support. Now, Netgear also has small, home and some top-end enterprise level switches, but they are one of the few brands that offer lifetime warranties. That is, that they will cover the repair and replacement of this device within a lifetime. Now, lifetime is a relative term. It doesn't mean that this switch will probably last forever. It's fallible. It has hardware inside it that is susceptible to age. What they are saying is they have done everything possible for this device to last forever, and beyond anything that they can't predict, it will still be covered within a lifetime warranty. Now, a simple Google of lifetime warranties online will show you that it's not completely foolproof. Some lifetime warranties have an area of contention built into the terms and conditions to do with fair usage, to do with expected lifespan of certain components, and lifetime warranty, although in most cases is genuinely lifetime, is not always lifetime. So do double check the terms and conditions or look into whether you actually think you're going to need it, because switches generally do last indefinitely anyway. I've never had a switch fail on me, touch wood, and I've dealt with plenty of them over the years, but that of course does not make any kind of realistic statistic. The final point I'm going to make is with a demonstration, and this is to do with noise. It's such an overlooked part of network switches that you will often never hear about it anywhere. Network switches actually generate a lot more noise than people think. Now, unmanaged switches generally are the most quiet. Because of their rudimentary architecture, they don't generate much noise at all. They only have to keep heat sinks inside cool, and when they do that, they use passive ventilation, so there's no fans. Even electronic humming is very, very minimal. However, managed switches, particularly more enterprise managed switches, 10GBE managed switches, and PoE switches can generate noticeably more noise. Not always. For example, here on the desk, you can just see it out of shot, is a PoE switch. It's being utilised for 2 cameras and an upcoming video, and you've barely heard it throughout this video. You've definitely heard it. But if you roll back and listen to the background of this video, it was there. However, this is a 10GBE non-PoE enterprise switch. It's only 8 ports. And what we're going to do is we're going to connect the power to this switch. We've got our mains power connector, and I'm going to keep quiet and just turn this switch on. Remember, nothing connected. You guys hearing that? Now, if you're in close proximity with this switch, you're going to hear that noise a lot. Moreover, the minute you have even 2 10GB connections active on this, that fan ramps up higher. It will get consistently higher. Right now, let's remove any vibration potential. That is the noise this is making. Air is being pushed out of that ventilation. This switch is making that much noise. Once again, I'm going to be quiet again. I'm going to power it down. So let's give it one last sec before I power it down. So it's worth highlighting that network switches do make a notable degree of noise, and a lot of people overlook these things when it comes to buying their first network switch. And if you are sensitive to noise, or you're going to take advantage of 10GBE with direct connection to a switch and a NAS or whatever, so you can edit on the fly, that's fantastic. But bear in mind, these devices make noise, and if you use 10GBE or you use managed, or in a lot of cases when you use PoE, that noise gets more and more, higher and higher, and busier, so you have to bear that in mind. The last thing to touch on just before we end this video, and I've made other videos on this, so I will skirt over it a tiny bit, will be the subject of SFP and copper or base T connectivity. Now, everyone out there is familiar with this. This is our Ethernet connection. This is the one that pretty much connects to absolutely anything in your home or office environment. This is known as cat cable. It's also known as copper-based into Ethernet, RJ45, and pretty much everyone utilises it. If you are going to use 1GBE, you can go up to about Cat5e. The minute you look at 10GBE, go to Cat6 and Cat7 cables due to better quality internals and thicker cabling. You can go up to a distance of about 20 meters, I'd say, before you start noticing any kind of performance drops in terms of, slower latency, that sort of thing. But generally, upgrading to 10GBE in that method, or just sticking with that, is absolutely fine. But if you're covering larger distances, or you are looking into 10GBE, that is when you have to look into something called SFP fiber, otherwise known as SFP+. SFP is fiber optic cabling that arrives with transistors on the end. Now, smaller cables like these, known as DACs, arrive in 3 to 5, maybe 7 meters, arrive with a transceiver already attached on the top. But any longer than that, you have to go for a more customized build where you buy the cables and buy the transistors separately, and you have to sort of build your connection as you go, a bit Build-A-Bear in that regard. Now, SFP is the probably the more expensive option of the two. It covers vaster distances while maintaining those high performing speeds, but that price threshold, particularly in terms of the transceivers and the cabling, can be a real downer for a number of you. Weirdly though, when you look at switches and even NAS systems, predominantly SFP only switches are lower in price than that of copper-based alternatives. So depending on the size of the area that you're going to be covering, you can really scale up where you want your money to be. And I think when it comes to choosing between copper and fibre, most people, particularly home users, prosumers, SMB users, they're going to go copper because it's just easier to upgrade and you can scale your upgradability and phase in 10 GBE quite easily. But on the other hand, those that have got larger surface areas, enterprise, multiple floors working vertically, not just horizontally, you are people that are either going to want to phase in SFP or go for a combo device like this one that has both copper and SFP ports. So you can have a mixed network and take advantage of both methods. There's even adapters out there that we've talked about in the past that allow you to switch a copper to a fibre and a fibre to a copper. But these little adapters, a few £100 each, I wouldn't always recommend them for enterprise use because they can get very, very hot and that can eventually affect and degrade the overall performance of your system. But this has been a before you buy about network switches. We've covered a lot of ground today and I've still not covered everything. We've still didn't talk about some of that stuff about combo, layer 2, 3 comparisons and more. But I wanted to keep this to the stone cold facts for you guys. I've done videos on most of those other things and individual projects. So I recommend you check those out. But otherwise, thank you so much for watching. If you've enjoyed this video, click like. If you want to learn more, click subscribe. And if you do need help, if you need free, impartial, unpaid advice on your setup, don't go to the comments. Go into the link in the description to the free advice section at NAS Compares. It's manned by myself and Ed. It may take us an extra day to get to you because we do get a lot of questions through there, but we do answer as I would say all of them, apart from the ones that are near enough impossible, and then we will forward them to an expert who can. But I would say 98% of them are all us, baby, and it's unbiased, it's impartial, and it's just there to help you. So do check those out. But otherwise, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.